the countless billions of galaxies in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites, a green and insignificant planet, is now dead.
Hey, welcome to Verse the World with Matt and Caleb.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Caleb. This week on the show, we're going to be talking to Todd P. Nelson about looking at horror through the lens of cosmic horror and folk horror. But first, Matt, did you find a story you wanted to talk about this week? Because mine's going to be a doozy.
Well, why don't you go first, and then we'll see if we have time.
So this is something that personally upset me. So I may have a hard time being unbiased on this story. But James Gunn was fired from Marvel this week. Just flat out fired over a series of tweets. And they're highly offensive tweets. But I was like, even that is a little not worth firing a really good writer-director who's worked on a great franchise for just that. That seemed a little petty. So I was upset, and then I started reading into it, and a lot of the articles that I was reading at first were just not really giving any context, and I guess it's because the first several articles I read were from more left-leaning kind of, or I think they were left-leaning journals, but I looked into it, and basically all of these tweets are older than 5 years old. Most of them are closer to 10. These are really old tweets that he put up. They're highly offensive, but the only reason that they were brought up is because he's somebody who heavily criticizes Trump, and apparently Fox News and a couple other right-leaning media outlets dug up these old tweets that I'm assuming were already deleted, and started posting them up to kind of show that he wasn't a good guy. I've looked through all of them that I can find, which is about a dozen, and none of them are newer than 2012. So this is before Disney hired him onto the Guardians franchise, and he was fired for these tweets. So I find this pretty upsetting. There's a petition to get him rehired, but I just feel like that's there's no grounds to fire him, really. I think it sets a bad precedence of this guy has not done this since then. He's clearly changed and developed as a person. A lot of actors and actresses are coming out to support him. There's not any allegations of him actually behaving poorly in any way. No sexual misconduct, rape allegations, none of that. But he was dropped immediately by the studio just for this. And I think part of it is just because studios are really nervous anytime there's a controversy now that they just have to fire people.
And I just wonder if something like this comes out and they don't fire him or whatever, is there really a huge backlash? For instance, I know Jeffrey Tambor, I think that's how you say his name, from Arrested Development. He got all these allegations and stuff, and there's some other stuff with that happened that was controversial, but just on his thing, most of the cast and everyone backed him up on it, and season 5 came out and he's in it, and as far as I know, pretty much everyone just backed him up on it, and it's everyone's already forgotten about that, and it's so it makes me, it's not Netflix made some kind of big decision that we got to cut him out of season 5 or whatever. It's I don't know, that's the only example I can think of where maybe they didn't take really brash action really fast. But is it really, what's the pushback going to be? Because I just really think a lot of it comes from a small group of really loud people.
Yeah.
And that it's actually not a big deal. Do you think Guardians 3,
because this could permanently damage a franchise, not having him on board to do Guardians 3 and finish the trilogy that he started. And it's kind of I think we've discussed it on the show before, the idea of this just being too much of a knee-jerk response to just fire someone over something. And part of the problem I feel is anytime someone apologizes, you get these accusations and the person apologizes, it makes the mob feel vindicated, oh, see, he is a bad person because he apologized. And so it's there's no situation where you can really win. You come out and apologize and be yeah, those, because he came out and was yeah, these are all old and they're in poor taste, but I'm not like this anymore. And just in apologizing, it's like people like, see, he's like guilty, like he's bad for doing this. And surprisingly, there's actually not a lot of media push. There was not a media push to get him fired. There was just people calling him out on his tweets and stuff. So I think it's a bad move on the studio's part. And there's a petition that I've already, like, once I found out there's a petition, I've maybe signed 2 petitions in my whole life. I like immediately went and signed it and shared it because I was like, this is stupid and bad. Like, this should not. This will turn things, like, even more into a witch hunt in Hollywood, because we need to get the bad people out of there. Like, the people who are involved in, like sexual misconduct acts and rapes and aren't being fired for it, aren't being held accountable for any of that, and everybody's brushing it aside. That's one thing. But, like, firing someone for some offensive jokes, and I have the list of tweets here, and some of them, just to give context, because you might not agree with me that this isn't worth firing someone over. Some of these tweets are pretty offensive. So the first one I saw was one that he made about the Expendables 2. Let me see if I can find that one here. Oh, the Expendables 1. He tweeted out, "The Expendables was so manly, I fucked the shit out of the little pussy boy next to me. The boys are back in town." So that's a pretty offensive. Like,
doesn't really make that much sense though.
Yeah, well, and he has this. In these older tweets, he definitely has this, like, he's trying to shock people and get a rise out of people. And the idea here is he's kind of making fun of the guys who were, like, supporting Expendables and, like, yeah, real men, all these other guys, little sissy boys and stuff like that. So he's, like, satirizing that. I'm not defending his joke, but, like, I get the context of it. It is poor humor. And some of these are even worse. This one's from 2012. Eagle snatches kid is what I call when I get lucky. This one is the one I've seen the most, and to me it's the least offensive one. This hotel shower is the weakest ever. Felt like a 3-year-old was peeing on my head.
That's like, Ellen could make that joke. That's not...
Yeah, okay, so here's some of the worst.
If you're primed for this guy's pedophile or something,
yeah,
then maybe.
And
but if you're just thinking on a joke level, that's like a really tame joke.
This isn't like the X-Men director. There's been no allegations of him actually doing anything wrong. So these are some of the worst ones. The Hardy Boys and the mystery of what it feels like when Uncle Bernie fists me. # sad children books. Photo shoot with 3 actresses trying to maintain a semi-chub so that I look impressive in these photos. This may be the plant version of adopting a damaged 12-year-old girl who steals your money and accuses you of molesting her. And just one more. I'm doing a big Hollywood film adaptation of The Giving Tree with a happy ending. The tree goes back and gives the kid a blowjob. So these are all these are poor taste. Like, these are poor taste jokes. But I'm really upset that he was fired before I even heard about the story. Like, I heard about him being fired was when the news broke for me. Like, that's such an immediate response of like, oh shit, like, we can't have a scandal, you're out of here.
Mm-hmm. It's really like, it's like blackmail in a way, but you haven't done anything wrong. It's like they're extorting people because these are tweets you could see on any comedian's page, right? Like any big comedian, you could see these tweets, and it would, if you just scrolled past one of these on Facebook and someone shared it in a photo, the thing about shower, like that shower one with the peeing on head, that sounds like something you'd see scrolling through Facebook that like a middle-aged mom would share. Yeah, it's not like. So, and then even the darker ones, I see stuff like that all the time. You don't stop and go, oh my God, look, this person must be a pedophile or something. It's like, it's very clear that it's intended to be humor. Yeah. And I'm biased. I'm always on team comedy. But even if it's not funny, you understand that all comedy comes from the same place. It's just whether it's funny or not, you don't know. And it's like...
Well, because like when a comic does something like this, I think the best thing is always to just like double down or explain the joke. Yeah. Like Ricky Gervais with the whole like Caitlyn Jenner issue. He just did not back down. It was like the joke is not about her being trans. The joke is about what he was joking about, and you were just upset because it's Caitlyn Jenner.
Well, why is it like supposed to be more? Because there's other crude humor you could make. Is it because it's like pedophilic type humor that's why? Because
It's like someone went through all of his old tweets to find the most damning.
Yeah.
It really has no context. It's not like people were like, oh, there's allegations that James Gunn's a pedophile. Well, we found these tweets that have pedophilic tones. It's like, no, we just are going to show these tweets because we're pretty upset at James Gunn right now.
yeah,
And then he gets fired, and it's like that's such a problem with like. You can start, like, we can start to use these witch hunts in a way where, like, oh, you don't like this producer who's messing with your project? Throw some allegations out. It doesn't matter. He's going to get fired before he has an opportunity to defend
let's
himself.
put some stuff together, put it in the news, and as soon as it becomes a story, shots fired. Now you can get the person fired.
Yeah, and it's kind of this. So I have this debate with people, and maybe we'll have to do an episode on it. I get nervous when I see, like, the Me Too movement and stuff like that going after directors, because at first it's like, okay, like, we've got a lot of evidence. Harvey Weinstein is clearly like a sexual predator. Let's get him out of there. Okay, that's good. Okay, now somebody's accusing Kevin Spacey of attempted rape. Okay, so we have an accusation. Oh, okay, he's already fired. Okay. Oh, he's being edited out of a movie. Okay, allegations hold up. He actually is like this. Okay, but he was, like, punished before we had confirmation. And then it's like, it's getting to the point where people are being pulled from projects as soon as the accusation is made. They don't have a chance to, like, put up a defense or not. And it's like, that's where I think these movements are important, but we have to be careful where you kind of have to have an innocent until proven guilty stance on these things. And that kind of sucks, because that means people have to come forward with evidence, and it is a terrible situation to have to come out and admit that you were mistreated by somebody. But if we don't have that precedence, then we have issues like this where people can just be, like, thrown out on their ear for no reason and have their career permanently damaged without proof.
I think there's a big issue with Me Too and the issue, it's the same thing. It's hard talking about because you don't want to say there's anything wrong with that. Obviously, like, women have had issues in the workplace in different areas for a long time, and I'm like fully in defense of them. But there's a major cry wolf thing going on, and the desensitizing of, like, words and issues, because when a lot of this stuff with Harvey Weinstein stuff was coming out, I started paying attention. And then somewhere along the line, I was like, I don't really care anymore. Like, now when I hear, like, oh, allegations against this person, if it's someone I like or not, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm still gonna, like, I'll go watch their movie. I'm not even gonna look into it, which is bad, because there's real people who might actually be sexual offenders, or actually, like, have it, there could be some real issues. And there is this mob mentality of, like, just, it's like you said, guilty until proven innocent. That's really the mentality.
Well, and it sucks. One of the worst cases I've seen is still Toby Turner on YouTube, Tobuscus. That guy has still not recovered, and most of the time if I bring him up in these discussions, like, well, that's a situation where someone accused him of rape and all these things, never backed it up, never proved it, and it was proven to be false allegations. His career has still not recovered in the slightest. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh, no, he was guilty.
Yeah,
the zeitgeist, like, social view of it as, oh, no, he was guilty. I remember he was guilty. And it's like, no, he was proven innocent.
I thought he was guilty too, which I didn't really care because I didn't watch him anyway, so it wasn't an issue. But I did look back on it and research it. I couldn't find whether it was proven or not. Like, there was nothing either way. Like, it was more like, do you believe the girl or do you not believe her, kind of thing. But yeah, and then, well, I wanted to talk about, like, the comedy of it too, just because I talk about this a lot. Have you thought about the fact that if you took, like, top 10 comedians of all time, right? Like Richard Pryor or, like, George Carlin or any of these guys, if any of those guys were now doing the exact same acts, they would be like they couldn't get away with any of that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's the reason why Jerry Seinfeld, like, and other comedians just will not perform on any college campus anymore. Yeah. And for the most part are getting more and more where they make less and less appearances on shows and stuff, because they're the kind of people who are just like, no, this is just funny and I'm gonna stand for it. And people are like, ooh, you can't make jokes, like, you can't do those things. I think one of the last people, I think he's got a Netflix series coming out. I'm hopeful he does, because we need some kind of, like, pushback of, like, super offensive non-caring humor is Norm Macdonald.
Yeah.
Norm Macdonald does not care. He has not cared at any point whether what he says is offensive or not, because he knows he's not serious about any of it.
Well, did you see the thing? And I know
we're gonna hear allegations against Norm Macdonald.
And we might just drag this topic out because I didn't really have too good of one anyway. But did you see? You know Tom Segura, the comedian. He's kind of been blowing up recently, the last couple of years. But he just had a Netflix special, and in the special, he does a joke about how you can't say the word retard anymore. Mm-hmm. So he was doing a joke about how you can't say that word anymore, mm-hmm. and he got all kind people were trying to get him taken off Netflix because he made a joke about how you can't say retard anymore. And there's other stuff, but the real problem I saw with that, I was reading some of the articles, Tom Segura he needs to apologize to people who, because I guess he said something at some point in his act, he had one of his jokes involved Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. But people didn't even watch the special, mm-hmm. and people were cutting together the Netflix special to where it made it look really bad, in really bad taste, he was making fun of people with Down syndrome, mm-hmm. and he wasn't. It was it's getting to the point where I don't even know what the goal is anymore for some of these people, because why, when you have to go out of your way to edit him to be wrong, or take the parts you want out of the act, and by the way, no comedy act looks good on paper. Mm-hmm. It's just most of a comedy act is the way you say things in the context. Yeah. So I just think I don't even know what the goal is at that point when you're manipulating to make a person look bad. What's your goal for getting Tom Segura off of Netflix?
Yeah, what's it going to accomplish?
What is the exact what's the purpose? Yeah. And it does make it. I mean, when you were talking about James Gunn and someone's messing with your project, it's it does almost raise a couple eyebrows in the conspiracy theory department of is there more to it? Is there reasons for these attacks? Or are people just super...
Because I can't find a reason. I can't find anybody was upset with James Gunn beforehand, except for the only stories I've been able to find is that Fox News and a few others were the first who started running this story, and they've been pretty upset with James Gunn being very vocal against Trump. That's the only
I'm a little
motivation that I've been able to find, but I feel to me this reads... If you were going to go conspiracy with it, unless this is just a freak accident where we have just this perfect storm of stupidity in how we handle these issues, so an innocent man that nobody has anything against, nobody's trying to get him fired, just got caught up in the crossfire of these issues. The only other way to read it would be did somebody want him out of there? Was somebody upset and wanted him to not be successful? Because that really is, you can use this against people now. But the last point I want to say is at the same time, the opposite is true of people who are not well liked or funny, but the more liberal media wants to uphold. Amy Schumer, nobody ever gets upset about the just brutally crude and crass shit that she says. Even her last Netflix special, I managed to watch most of it, was just to me very unfunny. It wasn't even she was making jokes at a point. It was she was just saying really gross stuff. And anytime somebody says that she's a bad comic, she's a hack comic, or steals jokes, everybody's oh, this is just gross. This is obscene to be attacking this woman. Yeah. And it's this is someone who's blatantly acting this way, and has also had accusations of people being she comes at people sexually, and she's sexually aggressive with men who are just trying to hang around, just.
I'm kind of with her. It's I've always been... I didn't really think she was that funny. I didn't really care that much for her material. But I know she's speaking to a specific audience, and people do think she's funny. Fine. Live and let live. Mm-hmm. The real thing that got me, after all the stuff, joke stealing, all that, was did you see the story where there was a comic who just became a headliner finally or something like that, and it was his first headline show? Mm-hmm. And she just came in, and then she demanded that she get on the show, and she stopped him in the middle of his act. And went on and said that she's I'm Amy Schumer. I got to get up on stage.
What?
Yeah, and I thought this was someone's embellishing this or exaggerating, but then I saw several sources, several people talking about it, and then the guy himself, because he gave her the mic, mm-hmm. which he's on a show. There's a podcast called Legion of Skanks, mm-hmm. and it's a bunch of comedians, and he came onto the show, and he actually was explaining the story, and they were kind of busting his balls a little bit, like, why did you actually give the mic? You should have told her to screw off. But it was just like, that was when I was like, okay, now I actually don't like you.
Yeah.
His family was there to watch because it was his first show, his first big show.
That sucks.
Well, I was going to make another point on the James Gunn thing. I get a little annoyed with the inconsistency of, I talk about it all the time, but, politics, because, like you said, he was a big anti-Trump guy, and just a few weeks ago when Roseanne, or maybe longer than that, when Roseanne had her big kerfuffle, most of the time, like, conservatives usually are the ones that back it up. It was they were backing her up and defending that sort of thing.
And I think they had the right to do that. I think her being pulled from that show for that joke was dumb as well.
But I saw a Reason, Reason magazine. They're sort of they're like really big. I don't know. They're centrist, like libertarian sort of. But they like made a post about James Gunn, and it kind of provocative. But they just had a thing at the top that said any conservatives who are okay with this are hypocrites or something like that. It was better worded than that. But everyone in the comments was like, Reason, you're just super, you're blah 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 and all this stuff. And I'm like, they were all like attacking. I'm like,
it's just a fact. If you were conservative and backed up Roseanne that she shouldn't be fired for her joke, and you're conservative and mad at James Gunn for making these jokes.
But he's anti-Trump now.
Yeah.
So now it's okay. We want him fired. And it's like, and it's not everyone. I'm not trying to say all conservatives are, obviously. And it's actually more probably radical, like Trump supporters that are inconsistent on it. But it's just this. It is this issue of. I just don't like the inconsistency there. Just have a line of like, is it okay or not okay? And it's just you just see the ideologies everywhere.
Yeah, I think that this might be a topic for a full episode at some point. But did you have anything else that you wanted to say or bring up before we move on to the...
I think we could just move into the
okay. So today we've got my roommate, Todd P. Nelson.
That's me.
Excellent guy, wonderful writer.
Not bad looking.
Not bad looking. And just really smart film buff. Coming on to talk to us about horror. Todd, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. My official title is Film Boy.
Is that BOI?
Yeah.
So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I dabble in writing and some basic film review. I graduated from college with an accounting degree and have regretted it since about the last semester of my senior year.
So before you graduated.
Yeah. I like to study film and things that make people interested in entertainment as an industry. I like to DM and GM for various tabletop RPG games.
You slide into people's DMs?
I do.
Okay.
You're going to have to explain what that means to me later.
Okay.
I don't know what I just committed to on the internet radio.
Let's just tell the internet radio that by DM you mean you're Dungeon Master in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
because they will probably take that a different way.
Oh, well, yes, I'm a Dungeon Master as well as a Game Master and a keeper of arcane lore in the Call of Cthulhu RPG. And Cthulhu is a mythos monster from the H.P. Lovecraft literary universe, which is also supported by various other authors over the years, and some of his works were based on previous authors around the turn of the 20th century all the way up through the mid-20th century.
Okay. So, what did you want to talk about today specifically? Did I explain the topic well?
Yeah, you got into it pretty well. So I want to talk about the idea of haunting framed with cosmic horror and folk horror and the differences between those. And haunting as, in human context, the idea of what haunts you. It doesn't have to be specifically about ghost stories or haunted houses or things like that. I want to talk about where the birth of that concept came from, all the way back from the ancient roots of human civilization. And I think to start off, I'll start with a quote by H.P. Lovecraft, and that is, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown." Which is something he would probably use to describe cosmic horror. And cosmic horror, in a nutshell, is the fear of the universe. It's the fear of the cosmos and everything that makes it up, and the realization that mankind has a very small part in that. It's the darker side of the transcendentalist coin. If you go and you look at all that transcendentalist artwork from the early 19th century, it's making the world really big and compared to humanity. Of course, that's the beautiful side of the coin. The dark side of the coin is the spooky H.P. Lovecraft stories.
Okay.
And I'm going to compare that to folk horror, which is the fear of... It's very similar. And the reason I want to choose these two topics is because they are very similar. Folk horror is a fear, and while cosmic horror is an objective fear, folk horror is the subjective fear. It's twisting the things that you compose your reality from into something that shows that your reality is kind of a sham. It's it's an existential fear, so to speak.
Okay. I think I'm really excited about this because I don't know what your feelings exactly are, but me and Matt have had the discussion before, and Matt kind of says that he doesn't believe in ghosts, but he likes the idea of haunting or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm really interested in all that stuff, but yeah. Obviously, I don't believe in ghosts and most or ghost stories or things like that. But the tales themselves are interesting because I think over time it's a collection of... I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but basically I think the idea of hauntings and just ghosts in general, I don't think there's any evidence for ghosts except for subjective evidence, but there's things about ghosts, for instance, that over time it seems like this is what a ghost is to everyone. So it's almost like, even whether it exists or not, it's like you were saying one time when you said something about God, and you're like, well, God exists whether he created us or we created him. And it's like, I think ghosts is the same thing to me, like ghost stories, because it's really us over time crafting something from subjective experience, turning it into like a more objective thing. I don't know. And that might be off topic.
I hope I'm not stepping on like what you're going to be talking about, but I like the Jordan Peterson view of like what your mind does, like the way your evolutionary brain works is you see like a dark corner in a room and hear a noise from it, and you don't start thinking through all the things it practically could be. You subconsciously immediately start thinking of all the worst things it could be, and that's a survival tactic because, like Matt says, I don't remember who said it, but it's the idea that if you hear a rustling in a bush and jump away from it, and there was a snake jumping out at you, it's good that you jumped away so you wouldn't die. And if it's just like the wind blowing, it's better to have jumped out of the way at the fear of a snake than to stay there and it could have been a snake. That kind of idea. And that's how your brain seems to work. And to me, like thinking about this topic beforehand, I don't know if this is what you're going to talk about, but that's kind of what haunting is. Like, because I've always leaned more spiritual than Matt has with like, oh, well, maybe some of this stuff is real. But really thinking about it, it's like, how much of the things that terrify you are really just the things that you're terrified about, and then you continue to project them until the point where if you drive yourself to paranoia, you can see or hear things that are actually like your fears that you already developed.
I got a question. So, and I'm sure you'll get more into this. So, cosmic horror, because I know like the H.P. Lovecraft universe is sort of always considered cosmic horror, right?
Yeah.
So cosmic horror is that, when you were talking about the unknown, is that the idea that the world or there's something so much bigger than we understand, and that's the horror? Or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah, that's part of it. I think it's hard to define cosmic horror into one small box. A lot of things can be cosmic horror, and there's no really hard and fast definition for me that separates cosmic horror from like elements of supernatural horror. Or we like to put horror into like these small pinhole boxes, but a lot of them blend together in multifarious ways.
So, do you want to we'll just let you get into it then, like what you're wanting to talk about?
And I think, I'll start by addressing the idea of haunting, which you guys kind of brought up. a minute ago. And haunting, to me, is that tool that developed in humanity at the dawn of human consciousness, right? Haunting is something that lives in the subjective unconscious sea between all peoples. Like what we pull out of that unconscious sea for ourselves, the way we get stimuli, we develop and take in stimuli and then evaluate that stimuli. If it's negative, then we'll come up with a tool to avoid that stimuli in the future. And that, in effect, is a type of haunting. But we communicate that to other human beings, whether it's through hereditary means or through social engineering or civilization. And when all those little bits come together, they take on new identities, and that is haunting. Haunted houses, haunted this, haunted that. Music can haunt a person. A movie can haunt a person. A ghost story can haunt a person. It's sort of all relative in the idea of haunting. When humankind, and this is the H.P. Lovecraft philosophy, and there is some scientific research to back this up, but when humankind first developed consciousness, the key to achieving it was born out of fear. We know that animals have instincts, including ourselves. We're able to relate those instincts to certain behaviors that we have. The need to get food, the need to get water, sustenance and shelter and things like that, which is mirrored by animals. But humans have a tool in their belts, or multiple tools in their belts on top of that instinct, and that's the ability to formulate strategy in order to get those things, and formulate strategy to avoid the things that we instinctually don't like. And those tools could be things like fear or humor and things like that. It's as civilization developed, that became more complex, but civilization also reintroduced new fears to develop our consciousness further. And so some people say that the key to the development of consciousness was actually born out of fear, and our desire to defeat it. The earliest, human cave paintings we can find, some of them depict, humans going hunting for various animals and things like that. And there are paintings, though, particularly in the area around France and Eastern Europe and certain places, which show these big creatures that the people on the alien shows like to point out as being that's proof that aliens came down. And whether or not that's true, the fact that humans decided to paint these they would consider fearful things, these large creatures or black mysterious objects or this and that, shows that there was things that we didn't understand that we had to develop strategy to avoid, or warning to our future generations through consciousness and through art. And so many things born out of our instincts to avoid, like fear. So that's kind of a really roundabout way, I guess, to make the argument that while cosmic horror might have been the birth of fear and consciousness, it's the fear of things we don't understand, things that are larger than us that we want to hide from. Folk horror was the seed that kept civilization guided on its way. The idea of monsters and things through lore and conversation, through language, that made sure that children didn't go too close to the river, or made sure that you didn't go out and catch the plague or something like that. Things to avoid.
That's interesting, because sometimes I do think about the lack of telling children stories to keep them from staying out too late, going around the wrong parts of the village, or being too close to the water, those kinds of things. Now we directly tell them, that's all we do kind of in the Western culture, how much that affects us socially is something that I think about sometimes, because it seems like we're all more on edge about safety, and I wonder if there's an element of telling it in stories eases the tension a little bit, maybe, where we can all relax a little bit more, except for the kids who are scared out of their mind that a woman's going to come out of the river and eat them.
If it's good things that you're teaching through it, it's useful, because some of those things, even when later you can kind of explain away the actual story part, something about that you still remember. I'm trying to think of examples, but there's definitely things that of those nature that it wasn't until I was way older when I'm like, why do I do this way? It's like, oh, it's because of this story that my brother told me or something like that.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
and even if a generation doesn't get the importance of like avoiding drowning in the river, if you keep telling the stories, then future generations will be warned. Whereas like one generation might not heed a warning.
It adds into this collective subconscious. Either way, whether you heed it or not, the idea of sharing it feeds into culture, and culture is what drives people's emotional and psychological development. That's, kind of getting back into it.
Yeah.
Right on.
So, which one do you prefer, I guess, maybe, like out of cosmic and folk horror?
So, I think cosmic horror is interesting because it can reveal a lot about the origins of the human psyche, especially in regard to fear. But I think folk horror is more interesting because it reveals something about the self, about our internal psychological and spiritual struggles and development that only it can show you. There is a certain thing about horror and fear being the oldest emotion that allows people to see something truly unfiltered about their souls and the way that they perceive things.
And that's in a really personal way, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
because it's specifically those fears are reflecting your actual, like, maybe
Fears?
even insecurities and stuff.
yeah.
Well, I was
exactly.
talking about like dreams. I think I talked about this when we had the dream podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But just because I had more dreams last night, it's like I have like nightmares,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not like really terrible stuff. Like, oh, someone's chased me with a machete or something. It's like I have nightmares where it'll just be basic, like almost anxiety stuff that I'll be dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not till I have the dream and realize this is a nightmare to me that I understand that I'm afraid of that thing sometimes, even if it's social things.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know if that's directly relatable, but that's what it made me think of.
Because we talk about this because we watch movies together a lot. Cosmic horror is really fun to me. It's like really mind-bending because especially like with Lovecraft and those kinds of horror stories, the idea that you create the monster, you create the thing that you're afraid of as you're reading it because it's not defined, really draws the viewer or the reader into the experience, which is why it's hard to translate to film. But then folk horror is what tends to bother me more. If someone really pulls off a good folk horror movie like Hereditary, which I still am very upset about.
Yeah, and I think that's because, and this is what I absolutely love about the movie Hereditary, regardless of its film quality, I love this movie because specifically it has developed a way, and you know it firsthand, that it can take those subtle realities that you've experienced throughout your life, like the idea of your life that you have built inside your head through little subconscious interactions over time, like you might not go to church, but you're aware of how a church operates, and you're aware of the kind of people and the kind of things that go on to it in a church. Or you might not have experienced demonology, but you know like the properties of it and the lore around that just from ancient civilization. But what I love about it is the movie Hereditary doesn't just tell you a spooky possession story like in some of the other films that have come out lately. It doesn't take those tools and use them in the way that we know them. It takes those tools and rends them from the concepts that we have in our brain, turns them upside down and puts them back down again. And it makes it unfamiliar to you. Folk horror, when it's done really well, is taking the concepts that you've developed through your life, making them unfamiliar to you, and showing you that your concept of yourself and reality is meaningless. And the parts of you that you think are right and good and will assure you, your future or your image of yourself, they aren't solid. They're infirm and they can be changed. And you could say that sounds pretty close to cosmic horror with some of H.P. Lovecraft's protagonists, and it is. But while the cosmic horror comes externally, Folk horror comes internally. It's external factors which create internal fear. And I think the movie The Witch does that more subtly. And that might be why it's more palatable to certain people. But a lot of people find the movie Hereditary to be less palatable because it's so aggressive in its stance to make your world unfamiliar and uncomfortable to you.
Yeah, what The Witch does that makes it slightly like unsettling and like unenjoyable in concept, Hereditary does in a way that's almost violating. Like, yeah. It's very slow and like forceful of how it twists all your views and concepts. If you have some of those social views of the world, it's interesting what you're saying, because I wonder how much of that is like the idea of a journey to the underworld, and maybe how you feel about like fear being the catalyst for change. So there's this idea that Jordan Peterson talks about that I like, of like forest fires are a good thing when we let them happen naturally, because the amount of dead wood at the bottom of the forest grows up until it reaches a point where it's naturally going to catch fire, and it usually does it at a point where it's going to damage the forest but not entirely wipe the whole thing out. And human preventative measures to keep forest fires from happening lets all that dead wood and all these things build up until it reaches a point where when a fire does happen, it goes out in a massive blaze that's uncontrollable and can wipe everything out and scorch it back down to the ground where it has to start completely over. And these small forest fires, these small burnings, burning off the dead stuff, is what keeps a forest around for like hundreds of years, living, like keeping its eco balance correct. And there's an idea of like people being the same way, where you build up like a system of beliefs that no longer work that you still carry around, or ways of viewing the world, or behaviors that maybe you should have outgrown, or aren't going to help you in the time of life that you're in now that you enjoyed when you were younger, those kinds of things. And you need to change that, and if you avoid the change, they pile and pile and pile up until you eventually collapse under it and like almost have to rebuild yourself from scratch. And that's like a terrible journey that someone can go through. And the proper way of handling it is the idea of addressing these issues as they come, like having small journeys into reflecting on yourself, the things you don't like about yourself, and changing them. And the idea of horror playing on like your concepts of the world and stuff. Like, I wonder how much of our fear is what drives us to change, and our fear being what keeps us alive is the thing that even socially drives us to betterment. Sure. And what you think about that in the context of folk horror.
I see where you're coming from, and I think I would agree with the idea that fear is a catalyst for change. Like like I said earlier, we have those instincts that we want certain things that'll keep us alive, but the desire to change ourselves in the eyes of others and change ourselves in our own respects comes from getting the idea that we become stale in those eyes, or the idea that we have started to become viewed negatively, whether by ourselves or by others. And both of those scenarios would create a sense of discomfort, or a sense of your memory of yourself not aligning with the reality you're perceiving, and that in a way is describing horror. And so that could be a fear that drives you forward in that regard. And I think that I would agree with that concept in the sense that when you experience change, they say that the motivators for that are greed, love, and fear. Or those three words can be interchanged with a lot of three words depending on who you talk to and what psychologist you prescribe to. But love is something that is intangible, and some people would say developed based on certain patterns of feeding and are instinctual. Like love is based on our instinctual things. Fear was born out of something new to us, something that wasn't natural, and that's consciousness. And so all those conscious decisions, all those elements of civilization, the argument that I might not necessarily prescribe to, but am making in this moment is that fear was the catalyst for so many of those social changes that have developed through civilization. And I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe in like a really circular way.
Yeah. That's interesting, because the horror movies that I've liked the most, like recently, like The Witch. In this context, I'll say I liked Hereditary. Or I liked The Babadook. It is the problems that the characters are facing within the movie is a really terrible internal problem that they are not addressing in some way. It's all these ideas of conflict, psychological conflict between families, like social conflict between families, and when you don't address it, like it can completely destroy you. So yeah, I like the idea that you're saying of like it's the motivator for change, and if you don't change, I guess that's where haunting can come in, where that fear is constantly there and you're not doing anything about it, and it just grows and grows until it overwhelms you.
Sure. The twisting of those like family bonds and the family ties that we're supposed to develop through our living is something that a lot of people know. A lot of people know family struggle, and they've experienced it, but it's not always presented in that accurate way through film and media that we undertake. And then to present it in a twisted way, and then to twist it a little bit further and add in those aspects of dark religious iconography and dark familial interactions, and saying that what you know is merely subjective to you, and the objective truth is that there is no truth in that regard to in regard to your family bonds. That's fear.
Interesting.
That movie is scary to me. Like, on a personal level, I would say that movie was scary to me because it showed how poorly I relate to my own family in certain ways. And which my family is great. I like to say that my family is great, and I do believe that. But this is a movie that comes in and says, no, your family's not great. Like, these lies that you put up for yourself where you don't have to worry about spending more time with your elderly family members, or how you relate to your younger siblings or your older siblings and your parents, and what they think about you it's all negative in truth.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think the thing that scares you, like in real life, oftentimes with like familial bonds and those kinds of things, is those relationships change over time, and you know that they should change over time. But if they're not changing naturally, like if somebody's refusing to let them change, like that's where a lot of the horror of the overbearing mother, and then it turns when you take that to extremes, it turns into like Jason or Psycho or something like that. And it's like these bonds didn't change the way they were supposed to naturally, and keeping them stinted and somebody refusing to grow like possessed them in a way until they were completely driven by this impulse to maintain the childlike connection to their child, even though they're an adult. I don't know. We're probably a little scatterbrained to the audience, but we're like playing with a lot of really interesting concepts and thoughts that I don't think I've.
Yeah, it's surprising that I've never really looked into too much of that, because I'm a big horror film fan, but I've never gotten deep. So it's actually really interesting to hear. But
how much are we allowed to talk about like movies? Do you guys not like spoilers or?
Well, which movies?
Well, like. For instance, The Witch, or for
I feel like for this discussion we can say we should probably say which movies we're going to spoil. Like, just be like, hey, we're gonna spoil Hereditary a bit, or we're gonna spoil The Witch a bit. We'll probably spoil The Witch, Hereditary, and Babadook to some extent throughout this episode, so just be warned.
Sure. Well, so I guess conceptually that's mostly what I had to say about folk and cosmic horror, just the ideas of them and how they're presented. I mean, if I'm going to summarize, I would say folk horror, the idea of folk horror that's usually presented through the images and the experience that you might have would be, your past haunting your present, the horror of memory, and the corruption and horrification of things that comfort you.
Would you mind going a little bit more into you're talking about the horror of memory? What exactly?
So yeah, the memory I'm tying to the idea of the collective subconscious, and also your own personal memory that you have. I wrote it down somewhere here. There's a thing called Stendhal syndrome or something like that, and it's something that happens when you try to remember something. The idea of Stendhal syndrome is that you're really only remembering the last time that you remember what you were trying to remember. And I don't know if you guys have talked about that before on the show or not.
I don't know if we have on the show.
We've definitely, I can't.
We've
started
discussed
to blend our conversations in the podcast, so I never know, but we definitely have talked about that, like false memories and how every time you're thinking of a memory, you're actually recreating that memory every time. It's not like some node that you're going back to. It's like you're actually recreating it.
Yeah.
But
so it's folk horror is using stimuli in the moment to blend that last period of remembering that you have. It's the idea that your memory is never actually what happened far enough out. Like there's little changes that occurred. Well, negative stimuli or horrific stimuli that you encounter in the moment could change that memory into an object of fear. You suddenly remember things that you once thought were comfortable or peaceful become fearful to you. It's a horrible realization. It happens in Lovecraft all the time, which is something mirrored in cosmic horror. Like, there's, for instance, in the, in the Whisper in the Dark, or I don't know, various protagonists' work, like lean back to old memories they had. The Shadow over Innsmouth is a really good example of that, and that's a really old story. And this is a spoiler for that, I guess. But in the end of The Shadow over Innsmouth, the protagonist realizes that he has familial relations to the monsters that have been hunting him down in the city, because there are these people who shared ancestry with these deep ones, these creatures, mermen, sort of, who lived under the sea, bred with people who lived on the land, and they created a new line of hybrid humanoids. Well, this guy realizes that his great-grandmother, his great-aunt, is related to these monsters, and that he's part of the horror himself after he's just escaped it. And it's blending those memories of that great aunt, that great grandmother he had, suddenly in a new light that causes fear. And so the memory, that's the personal memory that's affected. Then there's a memory of society, of culture. Whatever moment we're in and we're looking back at a historical event, we can put whatever light we want on it. You could twist great historical people like Thomas Jefferson to be one of the founders of our society, the founders of our government, and the veritable civilization that we developed. But then you could also look at him as a hypocrite, a person who advocated anti-slavery even though he had a lot of slaves and all this kind of thing. I mean, and that's just an example, but people like Thomas Jefferson, his only real problem is that he was a horrible president, and I'm going to stand by that. But, the thing is it's able to look back on the past, and I think the movie The Witch does this really well, and twist the idea of the pilgrims into a dark light. And it applies the things that they were afraid of to a movie that then makes you afraid of those same things. Whether or not you're scared by horror movies, when horror movies do folk horror correctly, you suddenly are able to reflect on the characters and the experiences they're having. You're suddenly able to get into their shoes and understand why they are afraid and the concept of fear as they know it.
So that's interesting because it plays with some of the psychological problems. So studying psychology quite a bit, one of the things I became aware of with memory that you have to be careful of is you can, if you're a bad psychologist, which there's a lot of them out there, you can rewrite someone's memory to make them think that they experienced rape, or they experienced being in a cult, or all these different things that never really happened. And it's something you learn pretty quick, that you have to be very careful to always just question the person in ways that are asking them for more detail and let them fill the detail. As a psychologist, you have to be very careful not to suggest information in your questions. And they're like, that's a real world horror where there's like, I think one of the most infamous cases I can think of, I don't know that you guys would have heard about it though, is the Church of Satan. Would either of you happen to know the founder of the Church of Satan in America?
No.
Okay, well, he came under fire pretty heavily at one point because a woman wrote a book with her psychologist accusing the Church of Satan of like participating in all these cult-like behaviors, sexual ceremonies, like just all these obscene things, and all these obscene things happened to her, and she was sexually abused by the Church of Satan, and she was also physically abused by the Church of Satan. And when they really looked into it, none of that had happened, and her psychologist had like kind of convinced her, and she had convinced herself that she had experienced these experiences that had never happened. And it's like it was very quickly like debunked. Like it was debunked almost like immediately, like a year after that. None of these things actually occurred, and it's like people do this all the time. There was an infamous case recently that happened where somebody like, or no, sorry, I'm thinking wrong. This wasn't an infamous case, but I was reading a psychologist's journal, and he was talking about a case where somebody came in, and this is the kind of person who like goes to bars every night and like goes home with strange men and stuff, and then wakes up and like has had sex with them and stuff. And somebody on TV had been talking about how like that is rape. And so then the person went to their psychologist and started asking them like, have I been raped? Like, have I been raped by like dozens of men? Like, am I a victim of like dozens of rapes? And it's like, you have to be very careful when someone asks you that, because it's like, in a sense, maybe, but it's not, because you've been so oblivious to the world around you that you've been intentionally, habitually participating in this behavior, but now you're looking back on it negatively, and you're rewriting it as if you have been infringed upon when you are the person like creating all these scenarios.
Which, in a way, would be a type of haunting in itself.
Because now you have this thing in your past that you're like, was that there or not?
Yeah, and that then can cause projections on your future interactions, which in this case would be sexual interactions. I totally agree with that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question, because I'm wondering where it fits in on the horror spectrum for you, but I'm thinking about things that really freak me out. And are you familiar with the phrase uncanny valley?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Where does that fit in exactly? I mean, would that fit into either of these camps? Because that's what's horrifying to me, is something almost human, as close to human as you can get, but I think that's why possession and those type of things are scary to people, because it's like, this is a human, but it's not a human. And
well, I think that might be some of the real
things like that.
I think that might be some of the real world fear. You know, you get into a fine line of, is possession real or not? But it's like, sometimes, regardless, even if you subscribe to possession is real and people can be possessed by outside influences, there's still the majority of the cases are people just behaving extremely out of character, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the uncanny valley, the same like psychological node as the uncanny valley.
It doesn't merely have to be the image or the shape or the contour of like twisting the human form. It could be personality or things like that. To go back a little bit on what you were saying in the last point, with regard to rewriting history, that's something that's pretty common in Lovecraft's works too, especially in the horror Red Hook, where in the end the protagonist character is basically rewritten. The entire event is not actually having occurred by his psychologist interviewing him. But in the twist of that, there's sort of like a real life example, and applying it to social memory would be like the people who are Holocaust revisionists, the people who deny the Holocaust and things like that. And moving that into sort of, I think you can tie that into this uncanny valley fear, in the sense that it's twisting what you know. Uncanny valley is twisting what you know, which I think definitely falls firmly into the folk horror realm. And if I want to give an example of that, maybe even one that a lot of people know, be like Darth Vader, I think falls into the uncanny valley of horror. When Darth Vader was a character who first appeared in A New Hope, he was terrifying, because for someone who's not familiar to that, that kind of costume or sci-fi, when it was still new to the viewing audience of major films, like this huge movie that comes out, take Hollywood by storm and most of society, Darth Vader is a terrifying image because he's almost human, but he's not quite. The idea of mending man and machine is commonplace today in our works of fantasy and science fiction film, but back then it could be a pretty terrifying concept, and for the characters in Star Wars, it definitely was. It's what lies behind the mask, what lies behind the almost human facade of Darth Vader, but more horror.
It's interesting how some like socially we outgrow some horrors really really quickly, like within a generation, and then other things like themes in folk horror, like we can never get away from. They're deeply embedded in our psychology.
Yeah, like isolation.
I guess it's
loneliness.
a stimuli thing. You get used to the specific case of Darth Vader, but you don't get used to the uncanny valley.
Yeah. There's always going to be something that seems slightly unfamiliar to you with regard to those themes of, is it an isolating thing? Is it a alienating thing? Does it make you question your memory? Things like that.
Yeah. That's interesting because I think that's something that's always like been a fear of mine as a kid, like in dreams and nightmares and those kinds of things, and then even to the present still, it's this fear that like haunts me a little bit, but like I'm aware that it's never actually occurred. Well, it may have happened a few times, but like for the most part it doesn't actually occur. It's just the fear of it that keeps it around, is the idea of all of a sudden somebody acting immediately and extremely out of character, like maybe you're riding in a car with somebody and it's a long drive through the country and you're just sitting there and you're both kind of not talking, you're just both relaxing, and then the person immediately starts like laughing maniacally and says something really weird and then just goes back to not doing anything. Like that kind of stuff is like I think about it all the time. Like I'll be in a calm situation and I'll think like, what if this person all of a sudden like reached over and started strangling me and laughing and then went back? And it's like that kind of, you can never really know what's going to happen next, but you just have to trust that what's known is going to stay what's known, and you're not going to, something's not going to come into your environment and throw you into that realm of fear for a minute, the new and unknown. Like it's a weird constant trust that you have that your universe is going to stay the same.
I think that relates to that's sort of the ideas of cosmic horror. You don't know what's going to happen. I think I've talked a lot more about folk horror today than I have about cosmic horror, but that's because in so many areas they blend. It's like a Venn diagram, but in the center it's like very few things that they don't overlap each other with. And what you kind of described to me sort of sounds like possession, like, but not in a demon inhabits a body, but what causes people to become possessed by
a thought or a decision
or a
to
deed.
do an action.
And I mean, we see that on the most obvious way, demon possession in culture. But to you guys, what does the idea of possession mean to you, and where do you think it comes from?
That's a tough one for me, leaning spiritually, because I don't know that I don't think I've come to a decision on what I believe, but I believe like 97% of possession things are people going crazy.
Right.
People losing their grip on anything consistent, and so they behave inconsistently. Because I think maybe people haven't been in as extreme environments as I have growing up, but I tend to think everybody's had at least one moment where they're in a situation and they think to themselves, what if I just started acting really fucking crazy right now to throw this person off? Like this person's like having an argument with me and I don't want to have it anymore. What if I just started acting like I was crazy and possessed and started saying weird shit? And you're like, what if I just like did that? And I wonder a lot of the times how much like possession is actually that. Somebody's just like snaps their view of reality because they're done with it and just starts acting crazy. And when you hear some of this like reoccurring demonic themes, like how much people are already aware of that, so they just like maybe even convince themselves that they're being possessed.
They turn it into a fear and then a tool to control people, which then goes kind of back to the story you told at the beginning about James Gunn. Like the idea of McCarthyism at its heart is demonizing.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to think a lot more about. It really is interesting that I've never put too much thought into a lot of these topics. Because possession, I don't know, because I don't know how I would define possession exactly, but I know what's terrifying about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think possession, you instantly think of like demon possession or something. But like, it's really, to me, it's like when I think personally about, like, for instance, I've been having all these weird sleepwalking episodes like the last couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Really weird, like the thought, and I told you, it's like, it's scary to think of setting up a camera, because now that's not me that I'm watching doing something. But I don't know if that ties more into the memory thing, or if it does tie into like that fear of me, you know, being basically I don't know, because it's me, but it's not me. Like, I'm not in control.
And
So in a way,
like
it's like a sleep. It's possession in a way, but possessed by what, I don't know.
Well, I think maybe even to an extent you can feel that in an episode of being blackout drunk, when you're hearing back instances of things you did. If you hear something that you just cannot grapple with the fact that you would have done that, you're like, that is not. There's no version of me that could have possibly done that. That is like a feeling of possession. That is a feeling of like, who was that night?
There's even things that you do and you do remember from like your past that's scary to think about, that you were in the mindset to do that. One time, this is more funny than scary, but our producer Eric, my little brother, he was really young. He was probably like 7 or 8 or something, and I had a slingshot. From like 2 feet away, I shot him in the butt, like in the ass, with a penny. And he just started instantly crying, and I laughed. And I think back to that, that's actually slightly scary to think about, because that's so like just straight up like almost evil and wrong, because that really hurt, like left a welt on his butt. And it's like, why did I do that? That's just as scary to me, and I know that I did it. It's not like me.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because it seems like another pillar of folklore is the older that you get, the more horrific these things are. The older a person is, the easier it is to perceive someone blindly acting out of whatever possession or whatever motivation they had, regardless of how nefarious or benevolent it was. It's easier to perceive that as horrific or negative toward yourself the older you get, because the more memory you have to draw from, the more norms it twists for you, and those alterations of those norms over the years.
I wonder how much of that in Hereditary was intentionally done with the grandmother, because we never meet the grandmother alive. So it's constantly twisting the character's perception of her grandmother all the way through to the end, but only through like tangential evidence that maybe her grandmother wasn't who she thought she was.
Yeah.
And that's one of the best elements of that movie. That's like I told you, there was that scene that should have come off really kooky.
Yeah.
And it was actually pretty like disturbing to me. And I wonder how much of that, like, you wouldn't have felt that here if you had met the grandmother alive at some point in the movie.
Oh yeah. It became easy for you to relate with the mom, who's the protagonist, would you say? She's like the first character we get in the shoes
hard
of.
to say if there is a protagonist or an antagonist, because we shift perspectives a couple times.
Yeah, it's hard to. Well, she's certainly one of the main characters, and so it's really easy to get in her shoes in that moment and be horrified by that, because of what we've seen about the mom and the idea of what we know scares her, and the like very, fragile grip that she has on her current reality. Which is funny, because the closer you get to losing your grip on reality, the scarier and scarier it is.
Everything gets, yeah. Well, that's why the movie The Babadook, as a horror movie, pretty good. Like some pretty decent like scares and tension building scenes, and there's a lot of like little well done filmmaking things I like, but it's not on the level of Hereditary or something like that, where it's like so fine tuned that it's almost seamless throughout the entire film. But I like that movie more and more the more I understand that that movie is explaining that grief or being alone or massive loss is possession. Like, the whole point of that movie is this monster coming into their house is somehow in the mom, and it's like you're always kind of wondering, like, what is the deal with it being outside of her, but then sometimes it's in her, and the kid is freaking out about it and stuff, and it's like it's a visual representation of her grief and how her grief is tearing her apart, tearing her and her son apart, to the point where you take the monster out, it's still a horrifying story of a mom who can't get a grip on reality and might end up killing her son and herself.
Right.
Because she loses all grip on reality, and she barely holds on at the end and manages to pull herself back from the abyss. And it's shown through conflict with a monster, but the monster is almost irrelevant except in explaining grief. And then the ending of that movie with her feeding the monster, and it stays in the basement, but now she has a grip on it. At first, like, it takes you a long time to process exactly what the filmmaker is trying to say with that, but once you get it, it's such a great analogy of you're not going to get rid of this thing, and you have to, like, give into it sometimes and feed it and let yourself grieve. You're constantly going to feel that you're never going to be fully over that loss, and it's going to affect your son at some point, and he's going to have to deal with it as well. It's such a good ending once I finally like got it, that I really love that movie, because it's so aware of what we're discussing. It's so aware of psychology is what's actually haunting you. Like, your mind is what's damning you.
The two scariest scenes in that movie to me, and this also kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. This also might be because I don't have a child, but it's the scene where she's trying to drive her son home from school, and he's like screaming and like freaking out in the back seat. But the way that they did it was, in a movie where a possession happens, you would think he would be like the possessed child of the demon or something. Like, it's a really spooky like shot, and she's like crying, and it's an emotionally raw moment that should be relatable to us, but we kind of want to push it away. And then the actual horror scene where she sees herself standing in the window after that fever dream she has of the TV thing. That those are the two scariest scenes in the whole movie for me, and I think they really hit that nail head home. What you were talking about.
That filmmaker, I hope she makes some more stuff, because that being her first film ever, she was on top of the theme she was playing with in a way that's like just incredible. I really like that movie a lot.
I'm wondering, if you don't mind me asking, with the Cosmic Horror stuff,
Sure.
what do you think? What is it about H.P. Lovecraft, like that writing style that somehow like encapsulates that cosmic horror? Like, what do you think it is about that his writing that showcases that so well?
That's a interesting question to try and like grapple. I think personally, just from my own opinion and like what studies I've done, I think it's because H.P. Lovecraft, who was an antiquarian and an Anglophile during his own time, which was the 1920s, liked to write like turn of the century English authors from like M.R. Knight, or M.R. James rather, and people like Algernon Blackwood and things like that. These sort of heavyweights in the idea of horror at the time H.P. Lovecraft was writing. Got a lot of his inspiration from, I think, of style from authors like them. And M.R. James, actually, we could talk about later, is a champion of folk horror. But the thing about H.P. Lovecraft's life is, when he was young, his father went crazy. His father was a traveling salesman, and one day he came home and just went nuts. And eventually, I think, killed himself. I could be wrong about that. But I'm pretty sure H.P. Lovecraft's father just went totally bananas one day out of the blue. He was a very perfectly normal guy and then lost it. And then because of that, his mother got a little crazy too. And so he lived with his mother for a long time and tried to support her through his writing, which reflected his life experience of his father going crazy and him wanting to try to harken back to an older era of things which should have been more pleasant. But in that style of writing, that older style, all of his stories unfold into mind-bending cosmic horror. It's juxtaposing the very comfortable sounding, very elegantly written and with elevated vocabulary language with the very harsh, dark, raw fear of archaic civilizations, of archaic mankind, which is the fear of things that are larger than you, and you don't understand your place in it, but you know you're on the bottom of the food chain. Juxtaposing that concept with this sort of elevated language of lots of vocabulary, lots of words, and despite all of that language shoved into a small short story, he still can't describe the horror that's present there. He still can't describe the monsters, which is something you talked about earlier. He always describes his monsters as indescribable or unknowable.
Indescribable, my favorite word, because now I can describe anything.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I saw the big monster and it was so scary that I passed out, and now I can't even relate it to you. It's that kind of concept that there's so much you can say as a human. There's so much work you can put into to craft an excellent sentence, but that sentence is meaningless in regard to the elements of living, the world and the earth and how the cosmos functions. It doesn't care about how good you are writing a sentence, just as a little human construct you have. Many of the beings that they run across don't even use language anymore, written or even spoken. Some in the horror story The Mound, which I really like, and that's one of the ones that H.P. Lovecraft ghost wrote for another author, which is Zelia Bishop. And The Mound was a story that Zelia Bishop requested H.P. Lovecraft write because she said, and I think her notes were really simple. They were like, I would like you to write a story about a burial mound, a Native American burial mound in Oklahoma, and during the day, the ghost of a man appears on it, and at night is the ghost of a headless woman. And H.P. Lovecraft saw this, and he scoffed at the idea. And so he tied it into his literary universe, and the mound wasn't just a burial mound, it was an entrance to some ancient subterranean civilization called Kinyan. And it had all these highly developed social stratums, and this great civilization teeming with cities and architecture beyond anything we could understand or replicate. But it had fallen many centuries ago into degradation, where the people had reached the peak of everything that they could, craft and could know, and then they became bored with themselves and started, socially eating itself until it declined into a horrific image of where our own culture could go. And I think I might be getting too far off track from your original question, but
that's right.
Lovecraft, he takes a simple idea, which could be very good, story of ghosts on a mound, in a Native American mound in Oklahoma, but he turns it into something that reflects our culture, our civilization, the very way that we perceive ourselves, and the way that in the future we might perceive ourselves as being two different things, and that difference can be a horrific thing. Under the Kinyan civilization is this, he shows that the Kinyan built their civilizations on the ruin of an even deeper subterranean civilization, and that one is where they don't go because it's, there's dark creatures who only appeal to darkness now. And it's kind of showing that, as we build on old civilization, we sort of demonize the most ancient forms of it, even though at one point that was our existence.
Yeah, I need to read a lot more Lovecraft. I have a little book that's got a collection. I've only read a couple of his stories. And then I guess it gets confusing sometimes, some of the stuff within the whole thing, because the Necronomicon is originally a Lovecraft thing, right?
Yes, but it's been used even by authors in his time used it. The idea of the Necronomicon, and it's based on a real book called the Voynich Manuscript, which is a real thing that exists.
Yeah, I have a book, the Necronomicon, and from what I can tell reading through it, it's based on, because it has a whole prologue thing, and it's talking about the Mad Arab, which I guess is a Lovecraft character, right?
He's supposedly the author of Necronomicon, and
I'm
not sure if he pops up in one of his stories or not. Maybe in the Massive Nyarlathotep, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's really weird, because I just found it in a bookstore one time. It was the Necronomicon, and it talks about the Mad Arabs, and then I'm but it doesn't really say anything about Lovecraft. It was another author, so I was really confused. I'm well, then what is this? And it's got a bunch of witchcraft and symbols and stuff in it. It's pretty cool. But
okay, well, unfortunately, we might have to get wrapping this up pretty soon, because we're all on kind of time constraints. But this has been really interesting. I think we've barely scratched the surface of this. We may even need to do a part 2 at some point of this, have you back on for other topics as well, but mostly just relatively soon do another episode and go a little deeper down.
Do like the presidency of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, I'm really interested in
why I hate Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick to it.
Okay.
I think he's the worst. I'm not gonna say any more about it. I mean, I could sit here for hours and talk about it.
Well, that's a good stinger for a future episode that'll come up. So I guess maybe do you each want to like maybe say a few words about like the idea of horror and what we've addressed so far? Matt, do you want to go first? Since you seem a little adrift, like you've got a lot of new things.
That's the
to think
thing,
about.
yeah. Though I may have been a little quiet. Well, partly I'm tired. We just got back from a trip, and I'm still a little rattled.
What a crazy trip.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I haven't been quite as like so eloquent in my speech this time, but part of it too is like it really is like a lot of new like opening up. Like, man, I got to really look into this more. So it's been more. I've just been listening a little bit more than having anything to contribute. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to. Yeah, there's just too much. Like, I don't even have much to say other than I want to like research more into each one of these like topics. So I thought the memory thing was just really interesting. But just overall, the biggest thing is just like me thinking about the connection of fear and psychology and how it's like such a, I don't know, it's just such a big part of change, like, because we think of fear as a bad thing, but in a way, like from what I was like from kind of what we were discussing, it just sounds like it's just so necessary for our evolution. Yeah,
so, and just general individual survival.
Right.
Like fear is what keeps you away from the things that are threatening.
So yeah, I'm gonna be doing more research, and we definitely got to do another one probably.
Yeah, this was good. I really feel like we dipped into some deep ethereal pool that we barely took a few strokes in, but we hit so many like deep. I feel like this is a shorter episode, but it might be harder for the listener because we hit so many like deep psychological ideas very quickly. But the thing with horror for me is like, you're a big fan of horror. I avoided horror for a long time because I saw it as a lesser genre, like especially in film. And when I decided to start getting into it, I kind of did it I lucked out and had people who were big horror fans who gave me like the best of the best to start off with. And so I really got into horror as, wow, this is really eloquently done, this is really brilliantly written, and starting to like unpack what horror is and why it bothers people when it's at its best. And probably in an attempt to like demystify my own fears, and to an extent, like you can, the better you understand yourself and understand your fears, you can work around them better and confront things better, but you can't demystify your own fears. It actually like reinforces like your own fears. You might start off in a place where you're like, possession is always a spiritual thing and it terrifies me, and then go, oh, it might not actually be in there, like it might not be at all, but it's not going to stop it from being a fearful thing. Like, you can't stop fear. Yeah. You can only overcome fear with courage. Like, that's one thing I've really like learned, is there's no undoing fear. There's only gaining courage to confront fears that maybe you shouldn't have. But that's all. That's my closing on it.
Sure. Well, I guess I want to get this out of the way. The most horrifying thing of the works of H.P. Lovecraft is that he's probably racist. At least his writing is racist. So this is kind of a disclaimer. If you're offended by very old racism in books, then be warned. His books are very good, his works are very good, but they might offend you.
And please, if you are easily offended by racism in old books, please don't read them, because I'm sick and tired of people trying to rewrite old books because there's racism in it.
It would be impossible with Lovecraft. It would be like looking at Swiss cheese. But
did you have any closing statements on any of the topics you brought up?
Sure. I think that I would agree with something that both of you have kind of brought up. Horror is an important part of culture. And even if you don't like horror movies, understanding horror and its part in our evolution and our development of civilization is essential. And we can't escape those things that cause us fear. We can only understand why we fear them and develop tools on how to abate those fears. But folk horror seems very bleak in the sense that if it's done correctly, sweeps away all those tools that we've developed. So that's another thing that I would warn is with some of the films and books we've talked about is if you're somebody who, you know, can't handle that kind of stuff very well, then be warned. But
some of those things do pull the rug out from under you and
Yeah.
make you feel like you'll never be safe again.
but we're also very good at getting over that kind of stuff too. So
I'm still not over Hereditary.
not all of us. Not all of us. There's, I guess, like a couple of quick points I want to make, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So something I want to do for people who want to get more folk horror, if they want to. There's an excellent essay that was written recently by Andy. I have no idea how to pronounce this. Pakarek? I'm not sure. But it's called From the Forest, Fields, and Furrows, and it's kind of an essay on the idea of folk horror that was recently written. There's a good documentary you can find, and if you're interested in discovering more about it, there's a Facebook group called Folk Horror Revival, and they sort of look at movies like The Wicker Man and The Conqueror Worm, which is actually about the Witchfinder General, and is based on an Edgar Allan Poe story, but has nothing to do with the story. If you want to read about folk horror, Edgar Allan Poe is a great place to start. Or H.P. Lovecraft, M.R. James, Algernon Blackwood. You can see movies like The Witch or Hereditary if you've got the gumption for it.
Which I don't.
Which your podcast host does not. So,
Yeah, thanks.
yeah. It's been great being on the show today. Thank you guys for having me.
Hey, thank you so
No
much
problem.
for like coming on and just being super professional and on top of all this and giving people resources and stuff.
I really felt like it's been a huge mess.
No, it's been great.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you've appreciated what I've had to say.
And I know you don't have I don't think you have a name or anything figured out yet, but I do think we should plug. You're planning on starting up a podcast on film.
Yeah.
Which I will likely be helping you with. And if you enjoyed Todd, because he has a wonderful NPR voice and is a deep intellectual, you should definitely check that out when it comes up. Do you have anything to say about that? Anything you can tease?
Yeah, well, we sort of did a trial run through the other night where we watched a very bad sci-fi clone of Star Wars from the 80s, but I loved it. And
No, you didn't. Don't lie.
well, I love that it exists. I think.
Yeah.
And so the concept
You're
of
bored out of your mind.
the concept of the show will sort of break down the writing of movies and books and things like that, and why we enjoy them, and then if they're bad, try to change them in a way that would make them more enjoyable. And so, with that, I think that's probably all I have to say.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Todd. We really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Matt, do you want to do a quick catch up with Matt and Caleb? I don't know that. I guess like you probably haven't had time to read or watch very much this week. I know I haven't. We can just talk about what we did this week.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I'll have like a dead week where I feel like I have stuff that I'll like start watching or whatever, but I just don't know that it's appropriate for the podcast.
Oh, do you have anything you want to talk about?
Well, like no, not really. Like I start because I try out new TV shows all the time. I started watching that show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But do you see what I mean? It's not necessarily a thing that sounds important to talk about.
Well, this is just kind of our lives.
Yeah. I always have like TV shows that are. I always have to have some kind of passive show that I'm always a go-to passive show.
Laughs
so now,
in the
and usually it's 20-minute shows like sitcoms or things like that. So right now that's what that is. But yeah, we went
That's
to.
what that is.
We went to Missouri yesterday. Columbia.
We had to find the nearest White Castle, which was 4.5 hours away.
I actually ate at that White Castle like 2 weeks ago. on
Did
my
you
way back
really?
to
Same
Pennsylvania. Yeah. I
What?
ate that White Castle in Columbia, Missouri.
That is weird.
That's cool. Did you like it?
It was pretty much like every other White Castle. At least my experience was. It was pretty good.
Honestly, here's the best thing about it. If I'm going to be like candid here, they had a paper like
Towel dispenser.
Well, yeah, like a napkin dispenser where you grab one napkin and
It was electric.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
another one comes out. That was the most.
That was the coolest.
That was the coolest thing.
That
about
was like
it.
a Tesla level invention of like, we're gonna save so many napkins from being uselessly wasted. Because when I go to McDonald's or something, because you have to like pull them out of that thing, I always end
Sometimes
up
you get,
pulling
like, too
like a pretty
many, or-
decent chunk
Yeah.
and using like 3 or 4 and then throwing the rest away.
But yeah, I think I like the sliders. I just think like I like the fact that if you're really hungry, so there's something more satisfying about putting down a bunch of sliders than just one
yeah,
burger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
It's
even
not about
though-
the flavor. It's about
It's
about
like you
pounding
feel like
food.
you're getting like I want to consume a lot of food right now, and I feel like I'm consuming a lot
Yeah.
of food.
Yeah.
But yeah, but otherwise it's sort of a regular fast
Yeah, it
food
wasn't.
joint,
It wasn't
really.
that spectacular. But
yeah.
if we had one locally, I would probably hit it up.
It-
all
It
the
would be
time.
one of my local haunts.
I'm so glad you stayed on for this for this section of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. Oh shoot, there was something I wanted to say that I watched. I did something really weird, but I can't remember what it was.
Oh, I do have one thing. I was telling you a little bit about it. I actually need to finish it. I'm only halfway through it. But there's a Hulu documentary I was watching about Hitchcock, but it was specifically about the Psycho shower scene, and it's a whole documentary.
Yeah.
And there's a part of it. They were, like I said, I need to watch the full thing, but they were, and maybe Todd would know as a film aficionado. Is that a word? Anyway,
Yeah, aficionado's a word.
well, I said it wrong then,
But
but
stupid or something.
well, anyway, the shower scene. I like they were making it out, and even showed like some stuff that Hitchcock had said that would made it seem like that the movie was actually a joke, like it it was supposed to be
Satire.
some kind of satire or something weird. And but it was only one scene, and I was like, am I hearing this wrong or what? Because the rest of the time they're just like, talking about how it was such a great cinematic moment.
Great.
But something about like he thought, like he said something like it was a joke. I guess maybe he was referencing to the fact that the actress in Psycho is only in like the first 10 minutes of the movie before that scene or something.
Mm-hmm.
So and she was a big name,
Mm-hmm.
and so maybe that's what he meant was like just the fact that people are going because of this big name, and then she's dead. Like I don't know. I'll have to. I need to watch the full thing, but I just.
Cool.
I don't know. It was pretty interesting.
Maybe it was. I mean, I don't know if this is related to that, but there is like one of the big debacles. I'm sure the documentary talks about this. Is that scene is one of the reasons they had trouble getting the movie out of editing, was because there was this big argument on, like having a nude woman be like showed in a film and then murdered. Like what you could show and what you couldn't show
Right.
became a big thing, and so like I can't remember what it is, but I think there might have been a joke about like it being okay to show a nude woman silhouetted, but not to show a nude woman only from here up. Like an entire body nude woman
Yeah,
silhouetted was okay, but you couldn't show a nude woman from like here up or something like
He's
that.
gesturing.
Yeah, there's a
above
lot
his
of weird
shoulders.
stuff about it. I don't know. I probably should finish it before I got
Before you
into it.
go.
But I don't know. It's just I think it's just interesting that there's a whole documentary just on that scene because it just shows how iconic the scene is in horror.
Yeah.
But I mean, just for like mainstream film stuff at the time, that's got to be like one of the more racy or like violent scenes. I don't know. Hitchcock's weird because from everything I've seen, he was kind of an asshole. Like he was a real
He
dick
liked to
director.
stir the pot. Like he liked to mess with people.
Yeah, but I guess just like he was just like as a director, he was just like really like bad like to the actors and actresses. But anyway.
Alright, well-
something more interesting than that.
No, I was actually gonna wrap this up.
Okay,
Real quick, is Airbnb going up this week, or do we want to wait and talk about that until an episode's up?
Probably wait just in
Okay.
case.
All right. Well, just be curious about whatever that was, I guess. So we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you everyone for listening and checking it out. Thank you, Todd, for coming on, and we'll definitely do another episode on this topic. Thanks, Eric, for recording, making our theme songs and everything, and yeah, we'll see you all next week. Oh wait, we're taking a week off. We're going on hiatus. So we'll see.
You'll see a video or something.
We'll see something. We'll put up a.